Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. The topic of discussion today is, of course, Alfred Hitchcock Cinema. We're going to be looking at two of his straight comedies and exploring whether or not Hitchcock was good within the comedy genre. And the films today are Mr. and Mrs. Smith, which is from 1941, starred Carole Lombard and Robert Montgomery. And from 1955, The Trouble with Harry, which is with John Forsythe and Shirley MacLaine as the stars. And my guest today is the Alfred Hitchcock geek, Joel Gunz, who's the editor and publisher of HitchGeek Magazine. And he also is now, he produced and directed 3 Hitchcock-themed documentary film series projects, How to Watch Hitchcock, Freak the Geek, and Alfred Hitchcock, Master of the Surreal. And coming up in October, of course, is the HitchCon Conference, which is going to be exploring all the ways in which Hitchcock dealt with love as the goals or obstacles of the characters in his various films. So, Joel, thanks again for joining me today. Great to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Feels good to be back in the saddle after 2 weeks.
And here we go. Once again, talking Hitchcock. And for those of you watching, feel free to leave any comments or questions throughout the conversation. Let us know what you think of these films or any questions about them, and we'll be happy to ask them when there's the best time to get to it. So off the bat, I was curious, we're asking ourselves whether or not Hitchcock was good, doing a straight comedy. So what do you think? Do you think that he was strong in this genre, or was it more his tongue-in-cheek sadistic humor that he shone better in?
Well, I think, you could almost make the argument that just about every one of Hitchcock's movies is a comedy, except for maybe The Wrong Man and one or two others. And,
right.
So one of the fun aspects of watching a Hitchcock film is that you're giggling until suddenly you're not, because the shit has gotten real, so to speak. And so I think the difference between all of these other movies in Mr. and Mrs. Smith and The Trouble with Harry is that these films are played for straight comedy, and they don't have the tension in them that would be provided by a violent, context or plot or story. And so so I think he was absolutely a comedy director throughout his career.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, if you look at films like Rope, Strangers on a Train, that have so much of that sadistic humor, Rope, for example, killing someone and then having the guy's family come over for dinner while he's in the coffee table. I mean, there's something funny about that in a very dark, sadistic way, which I suppose you would call black humor or dark humor. But here we see a screwball comedy, and The Trouble with Harry, which has elements of black humor, I'd say, but not obviously on the level of something like Rope or the tension, as you put it. So just looking at Mr. and Mrs. Smith, again, Carole Lombard and Robert Montgomery, 1941. So this is about a married couple, for those of you who haven't seen it, and they sort of have a lot of conflict off the top, and marriage is a little on the shaky side, and then there's a hypothetical question that Carole Lombard poses to her husband, which is, if you had to marry me all over again, would you? To which he says no. And then he finds out that they actually weren't legally married. And it goes on from there. So how do you feel about this one, Joel?
Well, I think that's some pretty dark stuff. I think that's
yeah.
It's a pretty dark comedy. And it, just because maybe in our last conversation, we talked about The Men Who Knew Too Much 1934 version, and the young people with the girl who gets kidnapped. Their humor, those comedy scenes are Knives Out, and they're very sarcastic. They're very cutting to each other, and then in kind of thinking about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it's almost as if Dave and Ann Smith the main couple, are sort of reincarnations of that couple from The Man Who Knew Too Much. And of course, that happened a lot in Hitchcock's movies. He recycled these characters. They get reincarnated from one movie to the next. And so the comedy and the humor in Mr. and Mrs. Smith is like sharp and deadly.
Yeah.
And they're kind of like putting it all on the line. You know, is you is or is you ain't my baby. Let's throw it down and you know, get real with this.
Right.
So I think it was definitely a darkness. And of course, same thing with, you know, The Trouble with Harry, of course. That's some black humor as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It is darker than perhaps people make of it or think of it. I mean, when we think of screwball comedy, we think of the rat-a-tat, the back and forthness, the lightness of it. You know, and he even, I mean, I really love the score in this film because it starts off with like Robert Montgomery just seated in a mess in the morning. And then, you know, from there we cut to his wife, Carole Lombard, in bed. So he's telling you so much in that shot right away that there's a couple who had a big fight the night before, clearly. But then at the same time, he has this very lighthearted music over it, which again was common, not always. I mean, he either was right on the nose with the music matching the action, like in Psycho, for example. But in this case, he was sort of, there's so much conflict in this film, yet we have this very, you know, lighthearted score. Do you think that worked in this film, or do you think it maybe needed, you know, a little bit more messiness or contrast in the score, or even in the tone of the film?
I hadn't thought of the score, and I'll have to go back and rewatch it. But I think the overall tone is, for one thing, it's very, because it's a screwball comedy and it's very, very quick paced. It is very rat-a-tat. And I think Hitch was enjoying getting back to those comedy roots, because again, like the comedy scenes in his British films have that same pacing to them. And then he came to America, and he was doing Rebecca and Suspicion, and they're just like very slow paced, kind of lugubrious films. So I think, like, in terms of what I would say in terms of comic timing, it's like absolutely right on the money. I'd put this up there with, you know, His Girl Friday or some of the other screwballs from the 40s. And but I think, you know, what makes this like a very specifically Hitchcock screwball, like only he could have told this story, and that's what makes it, I think, unique and sets it apart. And this is what I think makes it work, is the digs that they take each other at each other. Like, we know from the opening scene that they're really not going to break up, and so there's no suspense. Like, we know they're going to get back together again, and so the only curiosity is, well, how is this going to play out? So we're spinning a yarn, right? Mm-hmm. And so that means that we can sort of like relax and just sort of like go with it and let the story carry us. And I think that's where like the, you know, not that I can remember the music, but I could see like the light tone of the music carrying it.
Yeah.
And what it's doing is it's underscoring, I think, and you see this in couples a lot. I think most couples are like this, that I think a lot of philosophers, Schopenhauer observed that there was, and I forget his language, but he observed that there was a certain sadomasochism in our relationships. And, you know, we want to keep that tension in the relationship by teasing, by maybe pushing each other's buttons. Some people get into physical, you know, practices in the basement, right? And all of that is, you know, part of, you know, what it takes to you know, keep the marriage going. You know, if we want to get really deep, we could even, you know, think about the god Pan, who is the god of music and beauty and all this joyous stuff.
Right.
Historically, Pan was he was a monster, you know. Mm-hmm. and he was very destructive at the same time. And kind of messages you can't have one without the other. So it's very very
yeah.
kind of a
That's a good point, because you brought up the sadomasochism, and yeah, that's what I like so much about this film, is that it doesn't just have that often romanticized view of love that we see in a lot of Hollywood films, where we only see sort of the early roots of the relationship, with like the falling in love, but we don't spend enough time of those people sustaining the relationship and where the relationship evolves. And here, we see a real complex, a real love and hate, a violence. He craves this freedom, but at the same time, he clearly craves connection, which I thought was so interesting. It's like the With or Without You, the U2 song. It's like he can't live with her, he can't live without her. And on the one hand, it's interesting because he underestimates her, and he thinks that she needs him for money, and you see right away she's like getting a job, she's independent. She's strong. You didn't see that as much with the female characters back then. So I really thought, and he's more, he's arrogant. He takes her for granted. He doesn't really think that she's going to leave, and then she does. But then we see that those complex feelings that she has for him. I mean, she ends up going with another guy who I think she genuinely likes. She doesn't realize that she loves her husband more, of course, till later, but she's conflicted. She doesn't know which way to go. She very easily can turn against him, her husband, or for him. Even though it ends on a happy ending, it's still, you feel like the next scene it could just spin. And I really appreciated that, and I think it's great. On the Hitch Conference, I'm really looking forward to who's going to be talking about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, because of course the conference is all about how is love a part of Hitchcock's films, and this film is just, it relates so much to, of course in a screwball lighthearted way, but it relates so much to what relationships are really like. Do you feel that way when you see this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like all of their bickering and their pettiness, there are two things going on here. I think one is they're children. They are kids.
Yeah, that's a good point.
5-year-old, and even like Anne, Mrs. Smith, she's absolutely tied to rules. They've got a rule that they have to ask a question a month, and a rule about this, a rule about that. And he's like, more rules. And by the way, he's a lawyer, so that's ironic, right?
I forgot about that. Yeah.
And so she's got all this very like rigid thinking, that she reminds me of a precocious little 5 or 6-year-old girl who knows how to play by the rules and do everything just so.
Yeah.
And as a result, that's fine for a 5-year-old, but for an adult to be that way, that's a recipe for chaos, right?
Right.
And so it's like, but then they're in certain ways, they're kind of like, well, teenagers, because basically what they do is they fight all the time so that they can have makeup sex.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. You saw that so closely. Like when he goes to work, they have this huge fight, and then when he calls her, she was so kind to him. And this is even after that hypothetical question where he says, well, I wouldn't marry you again. But in the next scene, she was totally nice to him. And I think you're true. Like you're right. I mean, they always knew how to spice things up. And I think the relationship that really lasts are the people that kind of organically have that, so.
And it's a high wire act, because it's also when you're you're playing with knives, and so you can cut, and real injury can happen. But and so the contrast with her male suitor, his partner Jeff, he doesn't have that. He's the absolute nicest. He's so nice. He's just like mashed potatoes. There's nothing, and
that's why she doesn't like him. Right in the end, like he won't fight for her. He won't fight the husband over her. Like he doesn't have any edge. Like he doesn't have the angst that
he has no knives. He has marshmallows in his back.
Yeah. It's like she thinks that she should like him. Like it's all subconscious. I don't think at a certain point I thought maybe she was doing this intentionally to make her husband jealous, which perhaps partly true. But I think she honestly thought she was done with her husband, and not totally conscious of the fact that she wasn't. But I think that he's the sort of guy that she thinks that she should like. That's what the traditional kind of marriage.
The rules that she's following say that she should like this guy. So
exactly.
and so it's like this couple is I think of the way that she phrases the question, if you could do it all over again, would you still marry me, is like, it was really carefully written and carefully phrased to I think point up a deeper challenge that they've had, or maybe even a problem they have with a lack of maturity. Because what she's asking is again, it's kind of a metaphysical question. If you could time travel back to the period before we were married, what choice would you make? And that opens up all kinds of ideas to unpack. But now that we've opened up kind of the theme of time and time travel and where we are in time, then that brings up other things like later on when she's getting ready for their date, and she pulls the dress out of the closet, and she's trying to put it on, and she hasn't worn the dress in 3 years, and she's like, I don't understand this dress. It doesn't, how did it shrink? She doesn't understand that time passed, and maybe Carole Lombard, who's like this thin somehow. Yeah. But anyway, and then after that, they they go to the Italian restaurant. Was it Aunt Lulu's?
Yeah, I forget the name, but I believe it was the first pizzeria in a movie.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, I read that. It was the first. If anyone's watching, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was the first pizzeria to ever be in a Hollywood film.
Oh, that's so awesome. So you got that in the Flushing Toilet and Psycho and Hitchcock.
Yeah, there you go. So he's got everything.
After the pizzeria. Anyway, so but the restaurant has changed, and they're expecting to see Aunt Lucy is her name. And instead, the neighborhood's gone downhill. It's,
that's right.
Food is terrible, and Aunt Lucy has turned into this cigar chewing dude. And once again, like, time has passed, but they haven't grown with it. They haven't grown with time. So they're still children, in that. I think that's what that's pointing up. Right?
That's a good point. Yeah, I never thought of that. That's really true. And it again, which makes me wonder about that ending, because is it as happy as it seems, or are they just recycling their behavior? I don't know. I don't know. Or maybe that's the best way to live.
Well, maybe they haven't grown a bit. Oh, and even like she runs into, is it Mrs. Devers, an old neighbor from her old hometown, and she says something to the effect of, well, I haven't seen you in years, and you haven't changed a bit. You still look like that little girl that I knew 15 years ago. I mean, she almost hits the point a little too hard,
Right.
But like you're saying, maybe, maybe they're perfect just the way they are, and they never need to change.
It could be, yeah.
They're just going to cycle through, fighting and making up, and that's their deal. Oh, so then see what you would think of this. Nothing is a mistake in a Hitchcock film, right?
Right, never.
Opening credits, all the titles go by. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock, screen-filling title, and it's superimposed over the nameplate of David Smith, in his the door knocker on his door, and so the obvious takeaway from that is that he identifies with Mr. Smith.
And wait, Mr. Smith was that the main character's name, is that?
Yeah, that's the main character's name. Is David.
That's right. I was just going by I always forget characters' names.
Oh, me too.
But I just go by the act, unless it's like so iconic, or I really, it's something I've scene again and again. But so I didn't notice that. So they superimposed. So you're saying he felt that like that could possibly be that his relationship was like that with his wife, or that he saw something in himself that was like that character. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
makes you wonder.
So it makes you wonder, what my takeaway from it is, and I'm totally riffing at this point, so I wouldn't bet my life on it.
Yeah,
I might bet a beer that the way that they behaved in their relationship, this sort of barbed, kind of wrestling, style, very well could be the way that Hitch and Alma were, in their private lives. Absolutely devoted to each other, 100%.
Right.
No question about that in my mind.
Yeah.
And maybe their devotion was also built around their sort of, embracing of the naughty, misbehaving side as well. So.
You never know, right? I mean, obviously so much has been, there's so much mystery around Hitchcock and that relationship, but you can only look at the work and what we know, and perhaps certainly things about him are in his movies, like his sense of humor. So is also his relationship in there. No one, it's hard to say, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is another movie that, there's some conflicting reports that he says he only did it because Carole Lombard asked him to when they were friends, that he just photographed it because it wasn't his cup of tea, and so he did it as a favor. However, apparently RKO, who produced it, said that no, he pursued the project. Do you know anything more about that?
It's been years since I've read about the making of stuff, so I can't really speak to that.
Yeah, I wonder about that, because it's not, of course, this is a film that is not talked about that much within Hitchcock's filmography. I've noticed on the Criterion Channel they have it on there now. If you read Hitchcock Truffaut, Truffaut asks him maybe one question about it. Same with The Trouble with Harry. It's so brief. Clearly, Truffaut wasn't that interested in these movies. And so it really makes me wonder, because the only obvious touches are the use of POV a couple of times. And when he gets knocked over, when he meets the women through his friend in that party, when he sees his wife later, as he falls, he uses a POV. And of course, the ending with the two skis was just, it reminds me of the North by Northwest ending.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's another shot. They're sitting and they're eating. I think they're eating breakfast. It's the beginning of the movie, and so they're still getting dressed, they're eating breakfast, and they're sitting in front of a window, and we cut to a two shot of them from the side for just a moment. So you've got, he's in profile, she's facing him like this, right, and then the breakfast table is between them. And then you've got this big, beautiful white window covered in white, what do you call it? A white, silky window covering.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
With the vertical pleats, right? And it is a carbon copy of the breakfast scene in Topaz between, two of the main characters in Topaz.
John Forsythe.
John Forsythe. Yeah, and Kevin Gore, in Cuba, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he's shirtless, and and she's in this gauzy,
right.
But it's the same setup, same window, same curtains, and it just reminded me that Hitch he liked to take these visual ideas and sort of, I think he sort of fetishized them, from film to film. But,
Yeah. Certainly those few touches. Perhaps because, he says, well, he just photographed it. And I think really because it's so much about this couple, it's so much about the performance. The performances are a bit broad, but the timing, the comedic timing was so well done. They weren't really overdoing it in terms of like schmacting or being over the top. I actually thought they were playing it straight, like I said, a bit broad.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
at the
right.
same, but at the same time, it's really about that couple. It's about these people. It's about the performances. It's about the relationship. So it's less, it's less needed to have those real technical style of filmmaking like you really need in Rear Window or Psycho or North by Northwest, where it's I mean, it's all you have to do is you have these great performances, just capture them. I'm not saying that that's all directors have to do sometimes, but clearly that was the most important thing. So maybe Hitchcock recognized that. I don't know what you think.
No, I think so. And there aren't any like bravura shots. There's no,
Exactly.
you know.
Yeah.
But I wanted to actually go back and break down that breakfast scene. Um, I'll have to do it later, and I would love to do a shot by shot analysis of how he built that scene. Because as I was watching it just this last time in prep for this conversation, I didn't count the camera angles, but there were a lot of them, and there was a lot going on in there.
Yeah.
And the way he paced the building of that, and it might be except for the end, it might be the most crucial scene in the movie, right?
You mean early on when she poses the hypothetical question?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's almost like that's the murder scene.
Right.
No, because like when she asked that question, and if you could do it all over again, would you marry me? And he thinks, a little bit of suspense, pause, and he says, no. then we cut to her. She's been playing footsie with him under the table.
Right.
We watch her feet kind of.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes.
That's a little ankle bracelet.
Yeah.
And like that was a total Hitchcock move right there.
That's a good point. Yeah. That actually, it's funny because it's so seamless, isn't it? That I certainly I didn't clock it. Like, oh, there's like, oh, he's
it's so natural.
It's so natural. Yeah. It's it really makes me. I know had said to Truffaut that he wished he had experimented more with the form. I mean, clearly he was versatile in terms of he did, as we said last time, musicals, and he did suspense, he did horror, he did comedy. I wonder if if he had done more stories, like this is something that you'd see like Woody Allen do years later or something. Like I wonder what he could have done if it was just about the people. I think he had it in him. I mean, perhaps he wanted to stay within what he knew the audience wanted from him. I don't know. It's hard to say, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's a wonderful film. It's another movie that when I first saw it, I thought, meh. I saw it about 4 years ago, and then I saw it again. I just thought, wow, this is actually really, really good. More people should talk about it. I think it's mainly because we just don't recognize it as a quote unquote Hitchcock film. But it's kind of like when I look at Scorsese. I mean, people remember his gangster films so much, but they forget The Age of Innocence. I mean, he made a lot of films that had nothing to do with people who were in the mafia and stuff like that. But it's really, really, really good. Do you rate this quite high? Is it something you're quite fond of, or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in ranking, but and I give it a big thumbs up, 2 big thumbs up. And in fact, I'm gonna go get a little weird on you, because I was looking this up right before you called, and Robert Montgomery as Mr. Smith absolutely reminded me of Pete Campbell in Mad Men. Pete Campbell, played by Vincent.
Oh,
remember he was the.
Oh yeah, the younger guy, right? Yeah, I know who you mean. I don't know that show too well.
Okay.
But I know the face. I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, and so then I thought, I think Kartheimer had to have gone back to Robert Montgomery to get some, to do some research for the
Makes
role.
you wonder, yeah.
And then looking at his wife, and I don't see her name on the IMDb list here, but she plays kind of the meek and loyal wife, but she's kind of peppery and kind of, she's got her own kind of thing going, and their whole relationship is on again and off again.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I
Makes
just
you wonder.
You just put it out there.
If anyone knows if there's more Mad Men connection with this, let us know.
Yeah.
I've seen very little of that show, so but I know I can see the actors that you're talking about. But yeah, if anyone hasn't seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it's on the Criterion Channel. It's a wonderful film. Any final thoughts on this one?
Just one other. It's a trope. It's a recurring trope in Hitchcock, and I think this can also help kind of reorient, how we approach it. So you think of all the films where guys have fallen ill one way or another, and they have to rely on their female counterpart to revive them. So Spellbound, John Valentine has to be saved by his psychologist wife or fiance Ingrid Bergman. Vertigo, Scotty's got an illness, and he's relying on the women. First of all Midge, and then Madeline to try to save him. Marnie, it's reversed, and she's ill, and then Mark tries to save her. To disastrous ends until they get together sort of at the end. So in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, same thing. Mr. Smith shows up at the mountain cabin, the ski lodge, and fakes his own illness to try to win his wife back. And sure enough, it works. And she nurses him back to health until she realizes he's lying. They get to fight again, woo, and then they get to make love.
Right, and it also reminded me of what you said about The Man Who Knew Too Much last time. Like they weren't good. They weren't very good to the daughter, and so they had to fight to get the daughter back. And you see that here. I mean, he really has to fight to get her back, and he wasn't being very good with her early on. So yeah, there's always those connections of saving and fighting for what you want. So that's a good point.
And
I hadn't thought of that.
And once again, the man is the damsel in distress.
Right.
So,
that's true. Yeah, he's certainly more stressed than she is in this.
Yeah.
Just going to the chat box, quite a few comments have come in. George W. Starts, who is one of my Patreon members, actually. Hey, George, howdy. He says, I have to be honest and say that The Trouble with Harry is one of my least favorite Hitchcock films. Also, when you say straight comedy as opposed to what? Gay comedy. No, that's not what I meant. I just meant in terms of, that's a good point. Why do we put it that way? I guess in terms of just that it's the obvious light comedy as when we think comedy, I think people think often sitcom kind of comedy or lightheartedness, not edgy or dark or black, which needs a little more explanation, perhaps, of people who don't know that type of comedy. Paul Zenev says, hey, he saw Mr. and Mrs. Smith in his VHS days. All right. That's a while ago now. And what was that? Sorry.
Oh, it's just primo stuff on that VHS.
Yeah.
There's a whole layer of connoisseurship with VHS. If you want to get into the VHS community, and it's a passionate following, and you get the tapes for pennies on the dollar now. So.
Yeah, no, I bet there's always those niche markets for physical media copies. So, but even here in Toronto, you can still get a lot of VHSs for, like you said, like a couple of dollars, and used DVD and bookstores and stuff like that. Fergal Hughes is saying the pictures on the wall. Oh, a friend of yours.
That guy in a while.
He says the pictures on the walls in the Smiths' apartment are covered with portraits of women. I think I did kind of pick up on that, but I don't know if you did, Joel.
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Does Fergal have a thought on the meaning of that, or?
Yeah, let us know. And he goes on to say the pictures on the walls in David Smith's law office then are covered with portraits of men, including Shakespeare. Huh. Pictures on the walls in Smith. Okay. We'll have to if you think there's some kind of meaning with that, Fergal, let us know. And then George goes on to say Pete Campbell equals Vincent Kartheiser. I don't know what I think he's referring to the Mad Men.
Yeah. That Kartheiser is the actor's name who played Pete Campbell.
Right. I see. Okay, yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
All right, great.
what was the comment there on?
From Fergal.
Yeah, on Vincent Kartheiser.
Oh, he was just saying the actors. He was just letting us know the actor's name, I suppose.
Oh, okay.
P. Campbell. He just says P. Campbell equals Vincent Kartheiser.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for that. And like I said, feel free, folks, to drop questions and comments as we move along onto The Trouble with Harry. This is from 1955, for anyone who hasn't seen it. A bit of a rundown here. This is according to IMDb. The trouble with Harry is that he is dead. And while no one really minds, everyone feels responsible. After Harry's body is found in the woods, several locals must determine not only how and why he was killed, but what to do with the body. And this is with Shirley MacLaine. I think this is her first ever film performance. John Forsythe, Edmund Gwenn, who a lot of people will know as Santa Claus from Miracle on 34th Street, Mildred Natwick, Mildred Dunnock, and Jerry Mathers. I think that was the little boy, Jerry Mathers.
That was the Beaver kid, yeah.
Yeah.
That was his first, I think it was his first role before Leave It to Beaver, yeah.
Oh, he was the Beaver. Oh, God, I didn't even recognize him. Right. That's right. And then Royal Dano was the deputy sheriff. Okay, great. So how do you feel about Trouble with Harry, Joel?
This is, I think, this is essential Hitchcock. And I think it's right up there with, I would say, Vertigo, Marnie, Psycho, North by Northwest of his American films.
Oh, wow. So you really put this up there high.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It was one of Hitchcock's own favorite films.
Yeah, he loves it. He loved this movie. It's interesting.
And usually when a film didn't do well, like this one didn't do so well, he would distance himself from it.
That's right.
And this time he said, that just audiences had the wrong audience. The film was fine.
Yeah. Well, it did well in Europe, apparently. It was like played for years in sold out houses, and
yeah.
So I'm not surprised, actually, because it's more of that. It's so British. It's that humor is so British. So I can understand how the Europeans would appreciate it more.
Yeah. I think I wouldn't put my stake in this too deeply, but I would say that this might be the film, because of its European success, that really, kind of sealed his relationship with the French critics. There was a lot that they were studying, but this is definitely a high watermark. And what I absolutely love about it, if Mr. and Mrs. Smith, if we could imagine that couple is perfectly imperfect, and they need not change, they can remain babes in the city, then The Trouble with Harry is about a society that's perfectly imperfect, perfectly okay with its imperfections, eyes wide open, and that they are all babes in the woods, in the Vermont woods. And this is, I think this is Hitchcock's vision of paradise.
Right.
This is where I hope he is now.
Is it just in terms of the landscape, like the scenery?
The scenery. It's an autumnal film for sure, but also the people and the way they have this Zen like radical acceptance of each other and of what's this kind of staining thing that has.
That's what makes it so funny,
Yeah, they are. They live in a state of grace, like
right.
And so once again, we're back to some Christian ideas of grace and such. Everybody goes around confessing every sin to each other, and like everybody admits to the killing, and
right.
And then everybody accepts their confession and moves on. Nobody reacts.
That's a good. I really wondered why. I thought, is he doing that just because that's funny, or do you think there's more to it, that those choices to have it, everyone sort of very accepting, and there's no real emotion in terms of them, oh my God, I killed someone, or freaking out, So you think that came from some kind of what you had mentioned, Christian, something along the lines there?
Yeah, or I'd say a deeper religious thing, and so we see it in Christianity, but we also see it in Buddhism and other great traditions of, be exactly who you are, say exactly the truth, And
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
if we're all doing that, then then nobody gets hurt. And by the way, so like getting back to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, so their relationship, air quotes, unravels when she asks him a very pointed question: "Would you stay with me? Have stayed with me?" And he says, honestly, no. And that little piece of dialogue right there could easily be transposed into one of the relationships in The Trouble with Harry, that radical honesty. And then we see how it takes off in different directions. So she uses that radical honesty as an excuse to have another long-term fight that's going to end up in some great sex. No problem. And in The Trouble with Harry, they use all of this radical honesty to just, people fall in love all over the place. The captain and Mrs. Gravely and John Forsythe and oh God, she is so gorgeous. Shirley MacLaine.
Shirley MacLaine, yeah.
And everybody finds love one way or the other,
Yeah.
and then another big difference is that Mrs. Smith, she's tied up with rules. She's controlled by rules. She's just absolutely rigid in her rules. And in The Trouble with Harry, this is a lawless society. Like they lie to each other. They lie to the policeman. They're covering up each other's murder somehow. They're digging and burying and committing, necrophilia, I guess you could say. And nobody cares.
Yeah.
And in fact, the only presence of law that's there, the deputy sheriff, is absolutely, ineffective.
Yeah. And he's the only one who seems like he's disturbed or conflicted or things bother him, and he's not as like what he says early on about who the hell's shooting, and the other guy's blows off a little steam, as John Forsythe said. He's really the only one who doesn't fit within their world at all.
He's the in Hitchcock's world, there's always somebody who shows up who's a stain on society. Like in Shadow of a Doubt, it's Uncle Charlie. He's the stain.
Yes, yeah.
And the only stain is the emasculated sheriff's deputy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Ineffective, he's just, and everybody they accept him too, and they accept his the hostility of his lawfulness as just part of the plan too, and so they just
right.
They don't reject him. They invite him in.
Right.
To him and hide evidence.
Yeah, and this is another movie that I've seen it once before. Another one that I didn't really care for, and I liked it a lot more. And I think a lot of what you're saying is perhaps I couldn't quite consciously think of why I liked it more, other than I just thought it was so unique how no one really was getting worked up. No one was. I thought at first when I saw no one really caring, I thought, is he saying something about the fact that he's like in society that we don't feel for each other? Like, it kind of reminds me of in Rear Window, the woman at the top talking when the dog is killed, talking about how people don't care about one another. And then as the film progresses, I'm like, no, he's not saying that. I think he's just. It was both funny, a unique choice. But now I'm really thinking about what you said. Was that having to do with, being accepting of your choices, of accepting of what's happening in the present, living in the present, and not necessarily, because when you accept something, obviously, any anger you have is when you accept your anger, then you're no longer angry, right? Anger only comes from not accepting what's happening. So, is that something that you discovered in this, or is that something that in all the Hitchcock books people have talked about?
Well, I think you brought up an interesting connection that I hadn't seen before. Comparing what's going on here with Rear Window, and really what she was saying from that fire escape, you could say was, you people are all apathetic. She was railing against apathy.
Yeah.
And then what I see in Trouble with Harry is a deep empathy that everybody has for each other. So
right, except for Harry.
Except for Harry, yeah. So then in that sense, once again, Harry could be the Christ figure who carries the sins. So that idea of, all these people being, if I were to come to you or anyone else and confess a murder, that person would be horrified. And first,
of course,
call the police. Second thing would be to think horrible things about me. Every time they confess, and Shirley confesses to, being responsible for Harry's death, she explains it, and people were like, well, I can understand that. I can understand that, And so it's like they in a sense, I think they see themselves in the other person. If I were in your shoes, I would do that too. And so, like, I think that, like, the big message of Hitchcock's movies is don't be apathetic. Like, that's a huge strain. Apathy and complacency, as he said, to Truffaut, is what basically caused Melanie to that was her main problem, and that's what was causing the bird attacks, right? And so, and then by contrast, what he's saying is, the trouble with Harry is his model of what it means to be radically empathetic. And so my takeaway from it is, we look at somebody who's less fortunate than we are, and we might say, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And I think what the message of the trouble with Harry is, there in the grace of God, go I. And that means if I see a homeless person or if I see a millionaire, I can look at them and say, in the grace of God, there go I. In other words, that person, I am that person, and that person is me. It's very much an outreaching, what's the word I'm looking? It's a very soul expansive,
that we're all basically the same. We're all one. Yeah. In a lot of ways. That's really good insight. I would have never thought of it that way, because I guess I've always been interested in Zen Buddhism, and I had a teacher who was really interested in that as well. But I suppose I never look at stories that way, because you don't see storytelling told in this sort of people being very accepting. It's very, because there's no conflict or stuff like that. So that's a really, really good point. I know, it's funny because when Scorsese was asked about this film, he said, it looks beautiful, but I don't get it. And I know why he says that, because his films are so, full of rage and tension, and which I love. And I can understand, that a lot of people would have a hard time seeing that. It's not obvious.
Yeah.
It's obvious that they don't care, or not that they don't care, that they're accepting and they're, they're just sort of solving, trying to get out of the situation, but not getting worked up. They're all working together. The only one you really see worked up is the I forget the actor's name now. I always just call him Santa, the guy who plays Santa.
Oh, Edmund Gwenn,
yeah, him. He starts to get so sick of, like, digging in, like, the grave again and again. But everyone else is so calm.
Yeah. There's the line where after they're reinterring him for the last time, I think, and he says, and the pressure is on. They've got to hide the body from the police, and he says, "Let's bury him with hasty reverence." And I love that image of, how do you behave hastily reverent?
There's also more direct lines about sex in this film. Like, he even says to Shirley MacLaine, "I want to paint you naked." I thought, wow, 1955.
Yeah.
I don't know how he got that by the code. Yeah. And even when they were talking about when they're talking about the woman that sorry, what's his name again? Santa. I'm just gonna say Santa. Yeah, the captain. And he says, and he said, "Oh, they mentioned that she's a well preserved woman, You know, that, oh, well, everything well preserved has to be, what does he say again?
Must be open sometime.
It's opened up, something like that. Yeah. And I just thought, wow, you know, he always was clever. I mean, not that he wrote it. Whoever wrote it was the clever one. But in his films, he always found ways for people like North by Northwest to be talking about something so sexy or erotic or sexual, and no one actually says those words, except in this film they actually say naked.
Yeah. I love at the beginning there, apparently he's meeting Shirley MacLaine for the first time, and they're sitting on the porch, and she's to the murder, and he says, you know, I like the way your mouth moves.
Yeah.
Especially the way you say good.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's at that moment that like she knows that he knows that she knows that she's interested, and she gets this look on her face of like, absolutely played perfectly. She's like, this guy's horny like a dog for me. But like this, yes, I like this. I think I shall play this game too.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that. And then of course at the end with the double bed, you know, like that's what he wished for. Was it we of course you know what he's talking about. You know, and no one in the 50s, anytime you saw a bedroom, they always had the 2 single beds in every movie. And so I don't know how has anything been written about how he got some of this dialogue past the censors?
No, it has been written, but I can't.
That's interesting. I wonder, if anyone knows, please let us know. But again, this is a film that's not, you know, I'm sure it has been, but it's not the obvious film that gets discussed in length. Go ahead. Yeah.
Here's a feeling that I had, again, watching it just in prep for our conversation. I've always liked it as a hangout film. Tarantino described his movies as hangout films.
Right.
Like Jim Brown, he called that a hangout film. You just had these characters that were just like so awesome and cool. You just wanted to hang out with them, which means watching the movie over and over again. And, you know, I think Trouble with Harry is a real hangout movie. I just want to hang out with all these funny, quirky, beautiful. And the feeling that I had was that I had this heart feeling of just watching it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that scans. That's exactly, you know, I think that's very intentional on Hitch's part, that here we are, you know, half a century more later, and can still just like hang out with these people, which again gets you back to this, like the movie itself, I think is timeless. Like you feel like you're in the sort of Arcadia where it's just one long, beautiful day. And so like, then it kind of stands to reason that, you know, you could sort of go back there and uncork that movie and drink from it, you know, for an eternity. So.
Yeah, no, it's well said. I hadn't thought of it that way, and it's true. I mean, it is something that, I mean, you wish, in a way, you wish you had that same temperament, you know, but it's hard to achieve that. Another thing I thought about, you know, every time I think of John Forsythe, I think of him when he was older as like those sleazy characters he played in, you know, Dynasty and Justice for All with Pacino, you know, that really awful guy he plays there. But
that one.
He's so, it's great, and he's so charming in this. And I kept thinking, who does he remind me of? And he's like a less edgy and handsomer Bogart, I thought. He even sounded a little like him. I don't know if that popped up to you, but he really reminded me of him.
I have absolutely loved John Forsythe, and my image of him is, I never saw Dynasty, and I never saw the Pacino movie. So my whole take on him has been movies and TV shows from the 50s, and he always played, or as far as I can remember, always played the good guy, and kind of a father knows best kind of a figure.
Right, when he was young, yeah.
And man, if I had hair like that,
oh, he had a great head of hair, man. It's just like, even when he was old, like he always looked so slick.
Yeah.
And he's another actor people don't think about as much within, you know, he was in Topaz. I think just those, he's only in 2, right? Hitchcock, I think.
I think he was only in 2 Hitchcock films, and I think he was in a Hitchcock Presents episode or 2.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he was in a couple of those. Just going to the chat box, George is saying it means that the man is the breadwinner and the woman is the homemaker. Yes, Madman. I think he's referring to the paintings that Fergal brought up earlier.
Interesting.
Yeah, and Fergal goes on about those the portraits of women equals David is made effeminate, perhaps a typical Hitchcock male fear. Okay, and then possible. Yeah, I mean it's these are all things that are totally up for grabs. George says, interesting that in real life Hitchcock apparently was terrified of death, but in this particular film, death is treated very matter-of-factly as part of life and no big deal. That's a good point. Yeah, I didn't know he was terrified of death. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wasn't there an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents I Killed the Count in which several people confessed to a murder? I don't know. Do you know about that, Joel?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the show too well. I've seen a few episodes. Hello to Slasher Fred, says good evening. Paul Zenev says, why wouldn't Scorsese understand it? Because he was from an older generation. I don't know. I mean, I think he couldn't understand why they were so calm. I think that's what he meant. Because just looking at his work, no one's calm. I mean, everyone is furious or a very passionate film. So to see people so laid back, I think that's what he meant. It's just something he perhaps couldn't relate to.
One thing about the film, and I can see why this might be off-putting for some people. I think it's got a Lebowski effect. I think you have to see it once or twice before it really gets under your skin.
Yeah.
Because it's a very quiet film, and in some
very
of the
quiet,
very soft spoken in their dialogue, and so I think it doesn't come at you. It literally does not project towards you. You kind of have to really lean in and pay attention and sit up straight to take it in.
Yeah. It's really about about the behavior, which is the same with Mr. and Mrs. Smith. It's more, it's you gotta same with The Wrong Man. It's much more about the people rather than more of the suspense plot driven films that were more of a mix between the characters, but also the suspense, the plot, and stuff like that. Sorry, I think I cut you off. What were you saying, Joel?
Oh no, absolutely. I think it's that. I think there are other things going on with it too. Like, so Hitchcock's favorite artist was Paul Klee, and you might know him from the Twittering Machine.
I've heard of it. Yeah, I've heard the name.
Yeah, and so the opening credits were done by Saul Steinberg, the famous New Yorker cartoonist, and Steinberg's work is basically kind of a recap of Klee's a certain period in Klee's career. And Klee, like Hitchcock, had a very funny sense of humor about death. And death and comedy and tragedy and comedy were kind of like very, very much intertwined. And so kind of a fun rabbit hole to go down is after watching Trouble with Harry, just grab a book of Klee illustrations or, his artwork and just flip through there and just don't even read the captions. Don't read the text. Just look at the pictures and see how you react to them.
Okay. Yeah. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
You had mentioned a lot of last time the paintings Hitchcock was influenced, and it's other than like the obvious stuff like Dali that in Spellbound that he had his paintings and figures in. I never realized how much his films are inspired by artwork and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I really enjoyed it, and I think you're right. I think I think both these films there's a lot to discover about about people. There's certainly more. They're simple, but they have some more complexities to them, particularly Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Yeah.
And I think they're really good, and I can see why people don't take to them right away on an initial viewing, because they don't necessarily grab you by the throat like his more popular films do, like Psycho and Rear Window,
Yeah.
and movies like that. Did you have any? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, with his name on it, people expect one kind of a movie.
I think, yeah, exactly.
And there's a disconnect there.
Yeah, and Scorsese's like that too, and a lot of filmmakers are.
Yeah.
People get used to. They seem to get hooked on a certain type of movie, but it's certainly worth checking out for anyone who hasn't seen it. Did you have any final thoughts on this film?
Oh no, I just loved it.
Yeah.
I would say that of the two, it's probably it's pretty complex stuff, but it just goes down so easy,
Yes, it does. That's a really good point. Which, of course, brings us back to this question of whether, Hitchcock was good within the comedy genre. And before we started, we asked ourselves these questions, and what I was thinking was, well, maybe more in a dark humor or sadistic humor or like he had it in his films. But now, after talking about this and really just looking at the work, I found myself laughing in both movies. So I think
it's funny.
Yeah, if you laugh, then it's funny. Exactly. I wished, I wish he had done more movies like this. Perhaps down the road we'll see more people talking about his lesser known films. It's hard to say, but has your opinion changed at all in this last hour, Joel? Or
no, I learned a few things. I love that connection between apathy and empathy, and where this kind of falls in that scale. And that'll give me something to think about for sure.
Yeah, no, very well said. Well, this was a really great chat. I really enjoyed talking about these two films because I didn't know. It was more of before we went on thinking shit like, am I gonna have a lot to say about them? Because it like I said, it's not those classic hallmarks where we can talk about the montage, the editing, and this and that, all the razzle dazzle of it all and spectacle of it all. But in a way, there's kind of more to talk about in these movies. They're really really great. And Trouble with Harry, I don't know if that's on any major streaming. It's not on the Criterion channel. Like I said, Mr. and Mrs. Smith is on the Criterion channel.
Yeah.
But Trouble with Harry, I think it's pretty accessible, but I don't think it's on any of the major streamers. But Joel, this was great. I really always enjoy having you on. And for anyone who's interested, the Hitchcock Conference, I'll be one of the speakers in October. It's from October 1st to 3rd.
Yeah. And so this is, I cribbed a few of my ideas, and I got to give credit to Leslie Brill, author of the seminal book, The Hitchcock Romance, Love, and Irony in Hitchcock's Films. And this is, essential reading for any Hitchcock geeks out there. And Leslie will also be speaking at HitchCon in October. So absolutely thrilled to finally meet the guy and get his autograph in my dog-eared edition of his.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
That's no, I look forward to that. And yes, that's good. It's the website is hitchcon.org, and it's also in the description box below. This is going to be in Cape Cod, but if you can't make it, you can also you can join virtually. So I'm excited for it, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Sorry, George is saying Harry is available for streaming on Vudu, Amazon Prime, Apple TV in the States. Oh, okay. So it's on quite a few. Okay, great. And for those of you, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel. It is absolutely free. You just click on the subscribe button, which you can find below, right beside the description box. And I'm also now been lately putting the podcast on in audio format, so you can also find it on Spotify and Amazon and various platforms.
Okay.
But I'll be back again soon. And so yeah, Joel, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Hopefully I'll have you back soon.
Yeah.
Keep talking Hitch.
Yeah.
And take care, but we'll certainly be in touch.
Okay. Have a good one.
All right. Have a good one. And thanks so much, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Bye.